Welcome to the Social Priority Podcast. I'm your host, Star Panda, and today we talk about trans stuff. But first, the host of the All Trans Mask Everything panels and self-identified debate bro, goddammit Malcolm.
It's me.
How's life been treating you?
You know, it's been all right. Could be better, could be worse. No complaints.
Oh, good. So your channel is very focused on trans issues, especially from the trans mask perspective. Has this always been the case for you?
Yeah, that's something that I started doing. Streaming predominantly has always been somewhat trans masculine focused. The content that I made on YouTube before I started streaming, I started making YouTube videos, I want to say 2017, I think. A lot of it was just educational content about like trans mask issues, like talking about Packers and trans medicalism and all kinds of stuff like that. That's kind of always been the area that I've been in when I'm talking about like content creation and such.
Right. Did you have a specific goal you had for making your channel, or was it just like general trans issues that you wanted to speak on?
It was mostly aimed towards answering a lot of the questions that like young trans guys would have. When I first came out, I was pretty heavily involved in Facebook Spaces, either like modding or admitting in large and small groups. I still now admin one of the biggest FTM like AFAB non-binary groups on Facebook. And a lot of it was just kind of geared at answering a lot of those questions that everybody has when they first come out, you know, like, will testosterone do this? You know, how long do I need to be on hormones? Like, how do I start looking into top surgery? Things like that. A lot of it was aimed towards education of trans people. And the longer that I did it, I started incorporating like educating cis people as well, to kind of curb a lot of the transphobia that I see a lot of, you know, young trans people face from their families, like how to combat that, like what to say, like retorts, where to find information on X, Y, and Z, stuff like that.
Makes sense. So what has been your personal experience, I guess, of being a trans man online and on YouTube or any of that?
It's actually online has been okay for I guess it depends on the platform. So on Facebook, it's fine, I think, because it's very insular. You know, there's a lot of private groups that are specifically aimed towards specific discourse, specific kinds of people, specific identities, et cetera, et cetera. So it's easy to kind of pad our discussions around things that affect us specifically as like trans masculine or trans men, things like that. And they're, you know, groups that are so specific, like trans guys over 30, trans guys who have had phalloplasty, trans guys who are on the waiting list to have phalloplasty. Like a lot of these groups can be ultra hyper specific, and that's really nice to have like that kind of pointed discourse where we're all on the same page about things. Different platforms like Reddit or Twitter, I think it's a little bit more difficult to navigate because there is that aspect of community infighting where it comes to us like kind of, I wouldn't say like hogging the spotlight, but that's kind of the term that I'm inclined to use, where we want to highlight our specific issues by kind of putting other issues to the side because we're used to, you know, having insular conversations about specific topics. So kind of free for all platforms like Twitter or Reddit are a little bit more difficult to navigate.
Yeah.
Especially as like a trans guy, I think, just because like these are kind of conversations that aren't had publicly. Usually they're done in like closed groups and kind of insular spaces. Yeah.
What kind of particular conversations do you feel, I guess, that you might be excluded from as a trans man?
The biggest one I would say are like conversations about specific forms of oppression or like targeted transphobia towards trans men. Another one would probably be rates of violence, rates of discrimination, rates of oppression, things like that. Conversations about trans men in sports, conversations about medical transition. In kind of open spaces, a lot of these kind of dialogues and discourses are specified for trans women, which would make sense because this is like who's dominating the media circuit right now. That's like what people want to talk about. I mean, it makes sense, but there seems to be like very little room to kind of address these issues. And when they are brought up, it's almost like combative. Like it has to be one or the other. We can't talk about it holistically. As a trans issue, it has to be like a trans man or a trans woman issue, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. Are there any things that you enjoy about like being trans mask or like anything like that?
The two things that I always kind of talk about when I talk about things that I like about being trans are I really enjoy like the aspect of community that we get. I think that our kind of community is really special and really unique in the way that we kind of um, we're like blood brothers. Like all of us is kind of what it feels like to me.
Hmm.
Where as much beef as I have with somebody who is also trans, we're talking shit all day. Um, but if it comes down to the wire, like we're all pretty willing to defend each other, like to the teeth. And I think that that's really unique in the trans community. And the other thing that I really enjoy about being trans itself is kind of the level of introspection that I've had to do. I feel like I've grown exponentially just by virtue of being trans and doing that kind of introspection and self discovery. And I think that's really unique to a trans experience. And it's very humbling, and I feel like it aged me significantly. And I kind of know myself better than I ever would have if I was not trans. And I think that that's really unique and really cool.
Gotcha. Yeah. I know that personally, in those kinds of conversations, like that some trans people have, whether trans mask or trans femme, there are some conversations that I just stay away from.
Definitely.
Like, there's a lot of drama that can happen, and I'm the type of person to stay far away from drama. So, yeah, it is good to have that kind of camaraderie, though. Like, I
Yeah, for
do
sure.
follow like specific trans people on Twitter and on YouTube and stuff. So, yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from. What news types of things have you been following lately?
Um, I was kind of doing my touching grass kind of deal over the summer. I took a little hiatus. The last thing that I remember keeping up on was the WPATH Standards of Care 8. I haven't read through all of it yet. And in general, I can't remember what state it was. They just banned trans students from being able to use whatever bathroom they prefer.
Virginia.
And the sports bans were the last couple of things that I was kind of following up on, and trying to ban puberty blockers and medical transition for minors.
Yeah, the bathrooms thing just happened, and it's from Virginia. Apparently, they are challenging it, though. So, I mean, that's kind of obvious that would happen. But
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, I have an article pulled up for it. The governor basically promised in the elections that he was going to do it, and now he's doing it. So that's not really that surprising. But they are challenging it in courts. I don't remember who specifically is challenging it, but I would imagine someone like ACLU or something like that.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, in these kinds of states, like Virginia, who have like a Republican governor now, like they can just do this stuff, and it's frightening sometimes that they just do this stuff. Like no regard for trans kids and like where the whole like I guess our safety and all that, like just complete disregard for all that.
Yeah, and it's pointless. It's pointless, like culture war bullshit, honestly. Because
Yeah.
how many trans kids are in Virginia in the first place? How many kids are doing this, like that are using the bathroom other than their like assigned gender at birth bathroom or whatever? It's very few and far between. And it's reminiscent of when the governor of Utah, when they were trying to ban trans kids from competing in sports, the governor of Utah was like, "Dude, there's like one trans kid, and you guys want to pass a whole law? Like this is crazy." It just seems like culture war bullshit where they just want to get like it's almost like virtue points, like we're gonna ban the evil trans kids from the public bathrooms or whatever when there's like two of them total. It's just kind of useless, it seems.
Yeah. Yeah, it just doesn't make sense why they're focusing on this so much. Like there's another article that I found let's see if I can find it. In Boston, uh, was a protest. I think 10, not I think, but like I'm reading 10 anti-trans protesters were protesting in front of the Boston Children's Hospital. Have you been hearing about that lately?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the whole bomb threats and
Hmm.
stuff to the children's
Yep.
hospital. And they were met with hundreds of counter protesters. So obviously, like this is probably going to be a very losing kind of issue for conservatives and Republicans and stuff like that. Um, but yeah, it's like a lot of this centers around a ton of misinformation going around by the right wing.
Yeah, and I think a big problem with it too is that people are generally unfamiliar with Boston's Children's Hospital, that they do more than like gender confirmation surgery
Right.
and like provide hormones and stuff. This is shutting down like a center that's going to be, treating kids with like, little teeny tiny baby leukemia. Like how comically evil do you have to be to try and like threaten a hospital that treats children? Like it's just very it's very interesting to me how they think that this is going to play out for anybody who isn't like just I don't know, just out in a different world, I guess.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's a big issue with that because like I don't see how they don't understand the complete disregard for not even just trans people because like you said, Boston's Children's Hospital uh treats people other than trans people. They have kids who are on cancer treatments and stuff like that, and like if you call in a bomb threat for that, then these kids aren't going to get their cancer treatment. And
Yep.
what were you going to say?
I was gonna say, yep. It's just they pretend to care about children. It's just like virtue signaling to try and win the culture war that they already lost many many moons ago. It's
Yeah.
kind of embarrassing at this point, you know.
Um, so there have been a few other things that happened around the country. I assume while you were gone. Um, Florida, uh, I I guess they put through a law that prevented gender affirming care on their Medicaid list.
I did see that
Yeah,
and hate that. Um,
there is.
something.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry. Go ahead. No, finish your thing.
There is a lawsuit that is coming through. Um, it looks like it's Decker Al v Marstiller. Decker v Marstiller, I guess. It was filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Florida, and it is going to go against the Florida's healthcare ruling by its medical board. So yeah,
That's kind of been a general complaint for a really long time that Medicare and Medicaid and all of these kind of like state sponsored ways for people to access health insurance that's exclusionary in practice, especially if you're trans healthcare, is like deeply concerning. That it's kind of like how I want to say I can't remember what it was, but when they said that no federal money would go towards providing abortions with Obamacare and stuff like that, where people are up in arms, it's like this is a service that is medically necessary, and regardless of how you feel about it, that doesn't mean that we get to deny people access to this. If I was a Jehovah's Witness, do you think it's fair for me to say that Medicaid cannot cover blood transfusions or organ transplants because I'm a Jehovah's Witness, and I think that it's a it's against God for you to receive extra platelets in your time of need. Absolutely not. I think we're in a really scary spot where political will is determining what medical treatments are and aren't okay to be covered by insurance, and I think that's like actually really fucking scary. That if we get the wrong quote unquote wrong person, in a position of power or a position of authority, it's like, well, no more blood transfusions. We're all Jehovah's Witnesses now. That sucks.
yeah,
It's not good. It's not good.
yeah. That's exactly what I'm pretty much afraid of. Like all these evangelicals, and I'm like, I consider myself Christian, even though like I've been like waning on that idea lately. Um, but like I look at these people and like they have no compassion. Like they don't try to like they don't pretend even that they might be wrong, they might not have all the information. Um, they just go to people who like confirm their biases, and it's I guess it's a problem that the internet age has kind of brought around to us.
Yeah, definitely. And it just makes it frustrating because even though these people are, like you said, a pretty decent minority, right? You have 10 people
Hmm.
protesting at the Boston Children's Hospital. And I don't think that anybody who's, like a functional adult wants to shut down a literal children's hospital. It is scary the kind of progress that they're able to make legislatively, even though they are like a tiny minority.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I think that's an issue with like local governments that we have. Like I've talked to people before about like getting involved in local governments and like town halls and stuff like that. And we just need to keep pounding that in because like not enough people go to these things or run for like local office. We tend to focus on like the national level, and that's not enough like at all. So
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's something that is a general critique of like modern day politics in general, is that a lot of us kind of let local politics go at the wayside, because we're more focused on like national level stuff because that's like what's exciting, and you know we think we'll have a bigger impact, but in reality a lot of it's going to be local elections that especially generation, what's the new one, Z, whatever the one is that just turned 18, seem pretty disinterested in like local change, and they're kind of fixated on large scale change, which is awesome and super cool to have like people that are politically motivated to go out and like vote in presidential elections, like with the biggest voter turnout in fucking history for Joe Biden, our Lord and King Dark Brandon. But within that we see a neglect of local politics, and that's where a lot of this stuff is starting to go awry. With the legislation that's being proposed, it's usually on like a state level, right? And that's kind of where people need to mobilize a little bit better. But that, I feel like that's a general critique of politics in general, that local stuff is a little bit more important than people think.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so there's another uh, issue. I hadn't heard about this until I researched it. There was I guess I think it was a law that was put into effect in Montana, where trans people basically couldn't change their gender on their birth certificates.
Hmm.
It's being blocked by the courts basically, and the Montana like higher ups are basically like ignoring it, preventing people from like making those changes to their birth certificates. Um, like I, it's just another reason. They're another thing that they're doing. But like I'm kind of glad that we have these blocks in place to like challenge these people's like all of their issues that they have. Um, but yeah, like it's a lot of things happening legally that it feels like a huge civil rights fight at this point. Like they're not gonna stop. like I
Yeah, it's kind of like the the new social political topic.
yeah.
It used to be like abortion and gay marriage, and now it's like trans people. And I think that people are kind of weaponizing this as a way to like do culture war stuff because they can't really win on anything else. Like our country is literally fucking crumbling around us. So the only thing that they have to rely on is people's like literal, like feral fear of trans people using public restrooms or participating in sports or, God forbid, changing their gender identity markers. And it's just sad because it's such a minority of people and it's such a non-issue. Even if you look at the handful of instances where trans women have beat cis women at cisgender sports, or whatever, it's few and far between, and it doesn't require this level of intervention where we need to go to the legislature and have like a bill or a law drafted to prevent these people from doing this. Like, what happened to the the small government people wanting this massive government overreach to prevent who can't play in fucking high school sports. Like, it's insane. I don't understand it. Like, these are things that could be handled on a case by case basis. It could go through your school board. It could go through, your city council. We don't have to do like a state law if this is something that you're really concerned about. And what it will show is, when you have your city council meeting or you have your school board meeting and there's like two people there that are losing their minds because there's one trans kid in one district halfway across the state, nothing's going to change. And they'll understand like how far out there they are with their ideas. But it's frustrating to see that it's gaining so much momentum when we know that it's such a minority of people that are, one, even an issue that these people are looking at, and two, supporters of this issue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On the sports issue, like what kinds of news, I guess, stories have you been following?
Honestly, I try and stay away from the sports conversation as much as humanly possible.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's just ridiculous, and it's starting to bleed into really ridiculous avenues as well. Where we have people, I think it was somebody won at like chess or something like that. Like a trans woman won at chess, and a trans woman won at esports, or a trans woman won at like a skateboarding competition. It's like, how far are we going to take this? Are we going to take this weird biological essentialist that men are just like better at chess, and trans women by virtue of being trans women are men and therefore are superior at chess? Like, it's so out of control. I think the last one that I saw was the chess one or the skateboarding one. I think that was the last one that I saw.
I know I saw a skateboarding one. It was like where I don't think the trans person even won, and someone near last place was complaining because this person got higher than them, even though like a bunch of like 6 and 10-year-olds were above them too. It was ridiculous. Like, what are you doing?
It reminds me of Rachel McKinnon in the cycling competition where she got beat by this lady like 8 times in a row, and then she finally wins. And it's like, oh, trans women are destroying cis women's sports, and it's like, you won how many times, and now you're complaining? It's just, oh, I don't know. It's interesting to me. It's very interesting to me.
There's another thing happening in Texas where a judge is blocking those the investigations into trans supportive families. So that's good. like I see all of these like balances in our government, and I'm kind of appreciative of it at times, because like if they were just allowed to do all of this without any pushback, like I don't know where we would be at this point.
Yeah, for sure. I think the Texas situation specifically is like really, really, really scary. Especially because they're enforcing like leaving the state kind of enforcement about trans kids. Like if they're fleeing the state to get treatment elsewhere, they're still following up with that, and it's very Gestapo-esque. And I think that I agree with you. Where like I have like serious critiques of like the American legislative system and the government and stuff like that. But it is nice that they can't just like there's like there is some pushback, right? It's not just like a free for all. I am appreciative of that as well.
Right, yeah. Do you know if there's like any sort of a view, I guess, of how the system treats you as opposed to like a trans woman? Like people can't really tell at all, like between trans woman and trans man a lot of the time.
What do you mean by this system?
Like a lot of the system, they're making laws and executive orders based on trans women specifically, and like trying to take away those rights. Although trans men have been affected, obviously. But like, what is your view in your specific, I guess, position?
I think that one of the biggest issues that I have is there seems to be this misconception that legislators and TERFs or gender critical people or even conservatives are kind of just ignorant to the existence of trans men and trans masculine people. I think that in reality, a lot of the legislation that's being drafted specifically surrounding trans children is razor focused on trans men and trans masculine people.
Hmm.
The idea of social contagion and rapid onset gender dysphoria is something that is hyper specific to trans masculine people. That trails off of the explosion, quote unquote, of trans treatment at the Travis Stock Clinic in the United Kingdom. And I think that it is really important that there are legislations that are ignorant to the existence of trans men. For example, like the sports bans, where we say we want biological females only to compete in this category. Congratulations, now you have a bunch of biological females that are on testosterone competing. But the reality is that we're just not allowed to compete at all because it's considered doping, right?
Hmm.
But when we're looking at things specifically like banning specific kinds of healthcare, and we're banning minor transition. This is usually done in an effort to protect the women and the children, which is something that I think is not that I think that is razorly targeted against trans masculine and trans men, based on the idea of social contagion and protecting like our poor autistic girls who are being brainwashed, by this transgender ideology and the transgender cult. This is something that is very, very specifically targeted towards trans men, and I think that legislators are aware of this because they are operating under the guise of protecting young women and young girls specifically, which would be trans men or trans masculine people.
Yeah, I do know that the Boston Children's Hospital had those bomb threats over trans men,
Hmm.
like those kids uh, supposedly getting um, like mastectomies and stuff
Hmm.
like that. I guess it's basically the infantilization of like just trans people in general. Um, like I talked about something like this the last time or the time before, I don't remember which, but um, with a person who had detransitioned, and the same thing is happening to them because like they're being infantilized, they're being treated like they don't know what's best for them in that way, and like I think this is just a huge issue for trans people in general, where we're just infantilized and we don't know what's best for us. We should just let other people decide for us, and I think that's ridiculous.
I think infantilization affects everybody, but I think it specifically affects AFAB trans people,
Yeah.
because it's the idea that, especially with people making like the really strong correlative statement that a lot of AFAB trans people are autistic or neurodivergent or victims of trauma, and this is something that I think is true. And it's also an extension of misogyny as well. But I think that something that's really important too is that there's a statistic that's thrown around that trans men or trans people in general have high rates of either sexual or physical abuse in childhood and adolescence. And I think that while this is true, we can accept the fact that this is true, that there's a disproportionate amount of violence that trans people face in adolescence before they start medically transitioning or socially transitioning or coming out as trans or whatever, that we are targeted specifically from a very young age just because we are different. And I think that it does a significant disservice to kind of unilaterally paint this as like just blanket infantilization, because there are specific kinds of oppression and kind of dismissiveness of experience and speaking for that happens to trans women and also happens to trans men, but I think that it happens for different reasons. And I think it's really important to highlight both of these things and separate them. And that's why I think that talking about specific experiences, like trans specific experiences to AFAB or like trans masculine people, I know that like all these words are interchangeable, like it depending on who you ask. But for like trans masculine people and trans feminine people, like there are specific axes of oppression that they both face, and they're important to talk about. And it's important to specify why and how they're being oppressed on the basis of their assigned gender at birth, almost always, right? And that's just kind of my contention with the infantilization trope being unilaterally imposed. I think that it is, but for different reasons, and it's important to highlight those reasons as well.
Do you have any examples of those reasons?
Yeah, so for trans men, I would say that everybody thinks that trans men are just like autistic little girls who were coerced or brainwashed because they're stupid women who can't think for themselves. For trans women, I think a lot of it comes down to the idea that their trauma, their experience is trauma informed, or they're sexually deviant men, and therefore they're ill, they're unwell, they're fetishistic, they're AGP, any of these things, right? And this is a way to infantilize them, that they're men that don't know any better and are being enabled in their fetishes, and that for trans men, we're just confused little autistic girls. And I think that those two separate axes of oppression and infantilization are important to acknowledge, and that's why the distinction is important to acknowledge as well, because then we can, have conversations about these intersections appropriately, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a huge issue for me that because like I know in my personal experience that like I was always kind of uncomfortable with like sexuality and stuff like that. Um and like the trope of us being basically sex crazed men or like gay or something like that, like it's it's like a very cognitive dissonant thing for me. um it 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 really doesn't make sense. uh
No, and it never does. It's always based on like some kind of bullshit. Like the AGP trope is total bullshit. The idea of social contagion is total bullshit. The high correlation of like autism and being trans or whatever is total bullshit. Like there is something there, but it doesn't mean that autistic people are being brainwashed and groomed into being trans. Like it's all just bullshit, and it's a way to control the narrative and say that we don't know what's best for us, like you said. I just think that like the highlighting of why people think that about us based on what we identify as and what we are to them is important to highlight those specific experiences.
yeah. Is there anything like in particular you wanted to talk about for the trans experience or anything?
Um, I think I've touched on pretty much everything that I generally like to talk about. I just do my best to highlight. I think that there's kind of, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, there's a bit of what feels to me like oppression Olympics in a lot of the kind of conversations that we have about trans issues. Like, well, trans women have it worse in this way, and trans men have it worse in this way. Like, we're always kind of like at each other's throats, like trying to discern who has it worst, who's the most marginalized, who's the most oppressed. And I think that does like a disservice to us and what we're trying to do as trans people, to like get our experiences heard and our grievances addressed in an appropriate manner, and kind of shoving each other down to stand on top of each other to have our voice heard first. It really does a disservice. And I think that there are certain things that are specific to trans women, and there are certain things that are specific to trans men, and acknowledging these differences is okay. And that's something that I really like to highlight in my content, is that we are all different people with different experiences in different categories that identify in different ways. And these differences are fine to acknowledge, and that we shouldn't seek to be the loudest voice in the room because of who we are. We should spend time listening to each other and uplifting each other's voices instead of speaking over and for each other. And that's something that I find really important, at least for me, in the kind of content that I create, is that, trans men, in my experience, are often spoken for and over in a lot of conversations, most notably like debate spaces or like political spaces, the spaces that I exist in. And I'm not hurting anybody by talking about my experiences. I stay in my lane. I don't speak for other people. I speak for myself and people like me. And I think that that's fine. And I think that the idea that people are harming each other by talking about their experiences is really fucked up to me. And I wish that we would stop doing that. I think it's fine for us to be able to express specific forms of oppression that affect trans men and trans masculine people. That doesn't do anything to take away from trans women and trans feminine experiences. And I wish that we would all just fucking relax, I guess. It's kind of like the central point of everything that I try to do on the interwebs, at least.
Is there anything in particular that you would like to tell trans women in general?
Please just fucking ask. Don't just make shit up. Just fucking ask. Oh man, I've heard so much bullshit on panels, on talk shows, on podcasts, on debates, about people just speculating about trans masculine experiences. I've heard people say with their whole chest that most trans men don't get top surgery. I've heard people say that trans men want to compete with cis women because we're scared to compete against trans men. I've had trans women say that we're scared to go to men's prisons and inhabit men's spaces. And none of this is true. Just please fucking ask or go out of your way to consume content that is made by trans men. If you are not a trans man, please do not speak confidently on like trans masculine or trans men's issues because it's painstaking. It's painstaking. I feel like pulling my hair out. I have a really hard time listening to trans conversations or anything like that because it's amazing to me that the comfortability that a lot of people have speaking for and about trans men without knowing anything about us, right? And I don't know about anybody else. I can only speak for myself. I do my best to not speak on trans women's issues because I'm not a trans woman. I do my best not to, right? I try to direct people to voices who talk about this kind of stuff and know the ins and outs of this kind of stuff because I'm not a trans woman. I don't know everything about, surgery and social dynamics and all this other stuff. I direct people to those people. I ask the same courtesy be extended to us, That's all.
That is very salient and yeah, that's a good point. I think in this internet age, like, we all try to act like we know everything, and it's okay to not know, and we should be asking about those experiences rather than assuming that we know that. Like, it's like when I had the detransitioned person on my podcast. Like, I didn't know barely anything because like people were so dominated by the conservative narrative online about it, and it was probably it was not probably, but like it was a very interesting conversation because I didn't know everything there was to know about a detransitioned person. And like the same thing with trans men. Like, I want to know more about like their experiences, and that's why I have like a whole bunch of different people on my podcast so I can get those kinds of experiences and like points of view and all that. Like, I think we all just need a dose of like just asking other people about how they feel about something, or how they have gone through life, instead of just like assuming what has happened. Because like, if we keep doing that, we're basically the same as those conservatives who are trying to take away our rights. Like, who are assuming
For
like
sure.
these kids are being like forced into being trans or gay or something. And I think it's awful to treat anyone that way, really.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. And it's just I complain about it all the time. I feel like an old man like yelling from on my front lawn or whatever. Like the id poll and the oppression Olympics and all that other stuff, it does such a massive disservice to us because we all have collective grievances and we all kind of want the same thing, to just like be left the fuck alone, right? So there's no need to step on each other's heads to like have that message be heard. We don't lose anything by listening or by giving each other turns to speak. We just like kind of strengthen our knowledge and our communal understanding, right? Like, if you have like a well-rounded kind of conversation and you're familiar with like trans masculine and trans feminine issues, you have so much more strength in what you're trying to convey because you just know better, you know more, you're more informed, and we don't lose anything by teaching each other and listening to each other and giving each other turns to speak. And I think that we get way too caught up in trying to be the loudest voice in the room and the most correct in the room. And some people just need to be humbled and stay in their fucking lane. And I wish that it was more common parlance to do that. So that's what I try to do, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good way to be, honestly. Like, there's so many people online who try to be that person who knows everything for you, and I think it's kind of that, like, I guess the cis masculinity that people put. I guess they try to do that online because, like, I remember earlier online, like the early internet, I guess. Like, there was a bunch of cis men who were like basically trying to act like they knew everything. Like, they would tell you or like jump into conversations that they probably didn't know anything about, and then and then like act like they knew the answer to it instead of like maybe listening to someone who actually did. I think it still happens on like medical forums and stuff like that, where I think people in general just try to uh, act like they know what's going on and um, like they know what's best for a person who's asking maybe about like kidney stones, and it's it's ridiculous because like I guess people like that don't listen to like medical information very well, and we've been
Yeah, I
having
feel
it.
like a lot of people don't.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people have been doing that lately with like COVID and all that. Like we still have a pandemic happening. We just got like um the new booster out, and like everybody's acting like there's nothing happening still. And it's 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 draining sometimes cuz like I still wear a mask in public, just not outside. Like um when I go into stores I wear a mask because like I don't know, like I don't know what I contracted or like if someone else has contracted something. Like I would rather keep everyone safe that way instead of just assuming like um that like everybody else is thinking this way. And you know, like it's a huge issue with medical misinformation today.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, it's not trans specific at all. It's kind of in
Yeah,
general. Yeah.
yeah, like yeah, I don't know what I was gonna say there. It's uh it's definitely not trans specific, but like it does affect trans people a lot where they don't,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah, they don't know these medical information. They don't look at what let's say the WHO, um not the band, the organization, um they don't listen to what they're saying about like trans people because they're like updating all their shit. And like um you said you read it, some of it before.
Just a little bit. I've seen a couple of things here and there, but I haven't sat down and read the whole new WPATH standards of care.
Okay.
Just the things that I've seen like posted on Twitter, like some of the updates that they've made. I haven't sat down and read the whole thing yet, though.
Yeah, I saw a few updates on it too on Twitter, and I think it's a huge progress that we've been making in this medical field. Like, we're catching up to like what we might have known before all those books were burned. You know,
Yeah,
um,
for sure.
and I think that knowledge is really important for us to like get out there and share with everybody. Like um I just don't know how do you get through to people who try to act like they know all of that knowledge without, you know, listening to higher authorities or anything like that.
Or going insane trying to help them yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel sometimes.
Yeah. um is there anything else you wanted to touch on before um
I don't think so. I think we covered traversed a lot of topics, and I feel good. I feel good. Unless there's anything else you had.
no, I don't think so. If I do have other questions, I will ask you. But for now, I think we might be good.
Cool.
Um,
Sounds good.
yeah, I appreciate you coming on. Go ahead and shout yourself out.
Absolutely. I am goddammit Malcolm on everything. I am a trans guy, and I like to talk about trans political issues as a trans guy because we are few and far between. It's goddammit Malcolm on everything, and I do all trans mask everything / all trans everything panels every other Monday. And I do all of my recruiting on my Discord. So if you go to my Twitter, which is goddammit Malcolm, my link for my Discord's there, and that's where I do all the recruiting if anybody would like to participate. And thank you for your time. I appreciate the invite, and I appreciate the time that you spent with me.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you coming on and, like, I guess shooting the shit.
Always, it's what I'm here for. Anytime you'd like.